All right, Chevre, with the help of Hashem, we are starting the new Masechta, Masechtas Beitzah, or as some pronounce Masechtas Beya. Let's first begin by pointing out that the earlier the Shonim actually called this Masechta, Masechtas Yom Tov, because indeed the topic of the Masechta will be the laws of Yom Tov. True, very similar to Shabbos, but yes, generally there is the exception that on Yom Tov one is permitted to violate, but otherwise we will be known as a malacha for oichel nefesh, for food, for human consumption preparation. And as this is a befedish pasuk that achasher ye'achel l'chol nefesh hu levade ye'yaseh lachem, as we'll speak about that verse. And furthermore, we have the principle of sins of hoyel v'hutra l'tzoyrech hutra nama shaloi l'tzoyrech, as we'll explain when we focus on those topics. However, it became that in the latter generations, people do call this tractate not the laws of Yom Tov or Masechtas Yom Tov, but Masechtas Beitzah. Now, truth be told, that the first halacha that the Masechta will focus on will be about the Beitzah Shanoyle b'Yom Tov, a egg that was laid on Yom Tov, as we'll explain in a moment. There are some people that say that just like a chicken, a hen will produce an egg every single day. A remez that we should learn Torah every single day, just like the egg when it comes out is little, from it will hatch and grow a chick and ultimately a large rooster or hen. Similarly, that the Torah that we do every day, a little bit every day, but it hatches and it grows. Pruta pruta mitztarefes lecheshbon gadol. And finally, the intro to the intro, just many people are aware of it. Some people call this the tractate of Beitzah, which is the word, which means an egg, the word that the Mishnah opens up with. Many people call it Masechtas Beya, which is the word egg in Aramaic. There are reasons for that. Some people claim that we have to speak in a clean language. And since Beitzah is a name of part of the, let's say, of the human sexual anatomy, so we don't say the word Beitzah. Many people argue that how does Beya resolve that when Beya means an egg in Aramaic, and there's nothing not clean with the words Beitzah. It's referring to the egg of a chicken. But if you remember, there is a story that we learned in Masechta Sanhedrin Daf Hey Amud Beis, where Rabbeinu HaKadosh came to a location and he found that people over there are very lenient. They're very lenient with the laws of Tum and Tara. They would knead dough in waters that they knew were tamei, and everything was tamei there. And he wanted to find out, why did it come to be that way? And they discovered that there was a time prior where a Talmud came, a learned student, and he said that may bitzoyim, that's what he said, that marshland waters, ein machshirin, they will not make, in our case, the flour become susceptible to becoming tamei. And what was really the halacha is chevra mei beitzim ein machshirin, which means that the yolk of the eggs, right, they're not one of the 7 liquids, and they won't make anything susceptible to becoming tamei. But this student did not speak clearly, and instead of him saying mei beitzim, he said, or people understood that he said mei bitzoyim, so there was a confusion. And by the way, that was the source that the Rebbe said that Talmud al yoyra el imkain, only if he's noitel reshus merabbai, the whole heter hoyra'ah, what we call smicha nowadays, which isn't the real smicha, came from that story. In other words, when a person is coming to get permission to be a rav, one of the things that the one who's giving out the smicha has to look at is if this Talmud speaks clearly. Of course, he's not going to paskin a din if he doesn't know it, but we want to make sure that there's proper communication. But as we have a story that there was a confusion with the word egg and the word marshland waters, Beitzah Bitzoyim, so therefore, not to create a confusion, they call this Masechtas Beya. Okay, so that's that. So we're learning Masechtas Yom Tov, but we're calling it Masechtas Beya or Masechtas Beitzah. And today's daf, the opening, the Sechta will begin with 3 arguments between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. And according to our version, in all of the 3 arguments, we're going to have this anomaly that Beis Shammai will be the lenient one, Beis Hillel will be the stringent one. Obviously, there are many more areas. It's always exceptional, but there are many more areas where Beis Shammai is lenient and Beis Hillel is the stringent one. But in Hilchas Yom Tov, there's only these 3, which is why they're all put together. The first of the three is regarding an egg that was laid on Yom Tov. Beis Shammai leniently allows us to eat the egg, allows us also, of course, to move the egg, to be metaltal the egg, to handle the egg. Beis Hillel holds that this egg may not be eaten, really may not even be handled. Tiltul will be asur. And we're going to have no less than 4 approaches in the Gemara as to why, what's the underlying machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. We're going to have the first approach of Rav Nachman in the beginning of the Gemara that's going to link this halacha with the laws of muktzah. And Chevra, we're going to have to review the laws of muktzah. We have muktzah and muchan. Muchan means something that was set aside or prepared for it to be used on Shabbos or Yom Tov, which is good. Muktzah is the opposite. Something was set aside for it not to be used on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. Muktzah is a rabbinic prohibition, but we have a very foundational machlokes between the Tanach Reb Shimon and the Tanach Reb Yehuda. Reb Shimon has a much more lenient application of muktzah. He does not apply muktzah in many cases. We'll give examples when we learn. Rabbi Yehuda is the Tana that has a much broader and thus much more stringent application of the laws of muktzah. So Rav Nachman is going to link the machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel into really the machlokes later between Rabbi Yehuda and Rab Shimon concerning muktzah. We're going to have the second approach explaining why does Beis Shammai say regarding this egg that yes, it may be eaten and handled. Beis Hillel says no, it may not be eaten, not even handled. It's connected to the law of hachana, and this is famously known as hachana derabba. The word hachana means preparation, but we will explain it, God willing, when we come to Beis Amid Beis. The third approach that, God willing, will still chaparain today will be the approach of Rav Yosef that holds that according to Beis Hillel, the machmer, the problem with handling and eating an egg is gzeira mishum peiros hanoishrim. People will confuse it and think that if a fruit falls off a tree on Shabbos or on Yom Tov, you may eat it, and rabbinically you may not. If you can eat the egg, they'll think that you can eat those fruits that fell off the tree. And Dav Gimel on the top, we're going to have the fourth approach, just saying the words. The sheet of Rabbi Yitzchak that holds it's also a gezeira lebeis Hillel, and it's called just the word gezeira mishum mashkin shezavu. Now, another thing that we're going to find out in the first opening daf of the Masechtas Yom Tov, Masechtas Beitzah, is that when Rebbe formulated the Mishnayos, we know the rule that whenever he writes a anonymous Mishnah, stam Mishnah, and we know that really what he writes is subject to a machlokes, but he doesn't quote the machlokes. He just writes a Mishnah, a halacha, which follows one side of an argument. That's the way Rebbe is telling us that halacha, that's the halacha. It's called halachic stam Mishnah. Very interestingly, the stam Mishnah in Masechta Shabbos concerning this topic of muktzah, concerning the question of whether we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda or Rab Shimon. Again, Rab Shimon has a more lenient application of muktzah. Everyone subscribes to some areas of muktzah. Rab Shimon is a lot more lenient. Versus Rabbi Yehuda, who's more stringent, the Stam Mishnah in Masechta Shabbos versus the Stam Mishnah in Masechtas Beitzah, Masechtas Yom Tov won't be the same opinion. In other words, Rebbe will not have a standard. We paskin like Rabbi Yehuda or like Rab Shimon, but as we will see, he paskins one way concerning Shabbos and another concerning Yom Tov, and a lot more. Without any more further ado, let us start on Daf Beis on top of the Amid. Says the Holy Mishnah, Beitzah shenolda b'Yom Tov, an egg that was laid on Yom Tov. Now understand that there is unique halachas for Chol HaMoed. We will actually have another Masechta that's going to primarily focus on the laws of Chol HaMoed. That's called Masechtas Moed Katan. Here we're speaking about the Yom Tov proper. The day that, like we mentioned in the introduction, aside of the general exception of Oichel Nefesh and Mitoich Shehutra, a day in which there is an Isur and Asiyas Melacha. And let's just begin already getting into the first approach of the Gemara and the takanas that were made regarding muktzah, of not being allowed to move or to handle various items that were made concerning Shabbos, are the same regarding Yom Tov. So Beitzah shenolda b'Yom Tov, it was laid on Yom Tov proper. Beis Shammai oimrim, that's the first argument the Mishnah is quoting. Tei ochel, it may be eaten. Beis Hillel oimrim, right? The group, the chevra of Beis Hillel hold that loy say ochel may not be eaten. So first of all, the top Rashi, let's begin Rashi, and then we'll learn the top Tosfos. When the Mishnah says, according to Beis Hillel, and so we pass that the egg may not be eaten, it doesn't mean that it may never be eaten. Says Rashi, just to be clear, loy say yochel, boy bayom. It may not be eaten on Yom Tov. The next day you may eat it. And the Gemara will explain the reason. And like we spoke out, there's going to be 4 approaches in understanding the sheet of Beis Hillel. And the top Tosfos is focusing on 2 very important points. Point number 1 is that why are the words may you eat, may you not eat? Why don't you say oiser umater? And let me explain why asr and muter is a much more appropriate word theoretically, because the issue really isn't only about eating. The issue is also about moving, handling. Now, of course, according to Beis Shammai, when he says you can eat it, is a raya that you can handle it. Okay, fine. But let's go the opposite. When Beis Hillel says you may not eat it, it's beyond that. It's not only that you may not eat it, you may not even move it, which is generally the rules of muktzah. Again, we're going to begin with the first approach. Muktzah means something may not be moved. So why don't you use the words oisrin umatirin? And Tosfos says, and don't tell me, because if the Mishnah would have used the words asr and mutter, someone erroneously would have thought that asr means forever. And Tosfos, like Rashi, agrees that the problem, according to Beis Hillel, is only boy bayom. You may not eat it today. Tosfos says it's not true, that there are many other Mishnayos in where the word asr is used, but asr only means one day. Asr doesn't mean forever. Oh, so here, I mean, this is very important. And that is that when people think about the Isser of Muktzah, and I got to know Muktzah is only the first approach, but we're going to focus on the first approach. Muktzah means something that's called Muktzah may not be moved. Something that's not Muktzah means something may be moved. Chavra, we have to remember that there is a unique prohibition as it relates to eating. There are things that may be moved but may not be eaten. It's another level in the laws of Muktzah. And therefore, what we want to say is that the leniency of Beis Shammai isn't only that you are allowed to move it. It's not only that there's a heter, matirin, mutter, to be metaltel, even more. It's not even going to be prohibited to be eaten. And like we mentioned, normally there are other things that may be moved, but they may not be eaten. Here, may even be eaten according to Beis Shammai. Okay, we'll leave it at that. Okay. So that's machlokes number 1. Back inside the Mishnah. Machlokes number 2. All concerning Yom Tov. All cases where Beis Shammai is the one that's stringent, and Beis Hillel, so the opposite. Beis Shammai is the one that's lenient, and Beis Hillel is the one that's stringent. Beis Shammai yoimrim. And this is a unique halacha regarding the Yom Tov of Pesach. And as we learned in Masechtas Pesachim, that the prohibition regarding chametz, and furthermore regarding so'od, which is a leavening agent, that which has the power to make other flour and water turn into chametz, that we may not even own, we may not even have in our possession our chametz, bal yira or bal yamatzah. Now, how much of so'od and how much of chametz may we not have in our possession in order to violate the law of lo yamatzah? So Beis Shammai says, when it comes to so'od, so'od is a very strong chametz, right? It has the power to ferment other doughs. There, even the smaller amount is going to have the owner be in violation of thou shalt not have in your possession, because I is. But if it's just chametz, it's chametz, but it's not so'od, then you only are in violation with the larger amount of a koiseves. Guys, if you remember, we just had the shiur in Masechtas Yuma. Koiseves means a date. Now, a date, we're going to follow those who hold it's slightly smaller than an egg, but the size of a date is much larger than a kezayis. However, Beis Hillel, and here again, Beis Hillel, the exception, they are more stringent. They say zeh v'zeh b'kezayis. Even chametz, even the smaller amount already will have the owner in violation of bal yira bal yamatzah. Machlokes number 3 is regarding the following halacha. A few words of intro. When a person slaughters a domesticated animal, there is no mitzvah to cover its blood. However, if one shechts, obviously a kosher, non-domesticated animal, for example, a deer, or if you shecht any type of foul bird, including kaparas or chicken, there is a mitzvah to cover the dam be'offer, to cover the dam with earth or other similar coverings. Now, the problem is that even though when it comes to food for human consumption, one generally is allowed to break malachas that otherwise would have been a malacha Shabbos. So a person is allowed to shecht a chaya or shecht a bird on Yom Tov. You are allowed to do that. Problem is, how will you get earth to cover the blood when you're going to be touching upon digging, which can be included in the av of plowing? It can be included in the av of binyan, of building. When you have the earth itself, crumbling the earth in order to use it to cover the blood, can already go into the grinding of, as we'll speak a lot more when we learn the Gemara. So there's many potential problems when it comes to getting the earth out of the ground in order to fulfill the mitzvah. So now comes the Mishnah and says that if you shech a chaya or a bird on Yom Tov, in both cases you have the obligation of covering the blood with earth. Beis Shammai says, yachbor b'deker, dig with a spade, and v'yachas, and cover the earth. We're going to speak about this when we learn the Gemara. However, no, midrabanan, don't even shecht. If you did not prepare earth prior to Yom Tov, lo yishchait. Now, if a person did violate this rabbinic law and they did shech, now there is dam that needs to be covered. So says the Mishnah, meaning Beis Hillel will agree that if after the fact, post facto, she'im shachat, sheyachbor b'deker v'yachasa, that what Beis Shammai says to dig with a spade and to cover the blood will be permitted. We're gonna explain this, unpackage this when we learn the Gemara. And now comes the final line in the Mishnah that appears to have nothing to do with anything, and that has to be addressed. Says the Mishnah that the aphid of a kiram, that ashes of a stove, we were not talking about ashes of a stove. Beis Shammai lachatchila and Beis Hillel b'di'evet is speaking about digging with a spade, digging the earth with a spade. But the Mishnah says because the ashes of a stove are considered muchand, they are considered prepared to be used, they're not muktzah. What does that have to do with anything? The Gemara is going to address. Okay, so just the three topics is the machlokes regarding an egg that was laid on Yom Tov. How much is the minimum amount of chametz, which will have one who owns it in violation of Bal Yirah, Bal Yimatzah on Pesach, which is Yom Tov. And number three, shechting a chay and oif. The achreinim speak out that l'chayda, the order in the Mishnah should not have been the way it is, because the second argument is only regarding Pesach. The first and the last is a more general argument regarding Yom Tov. So why wouldn't we have first the machlokes of Beitzah, then the machlokes regarding Shchita, and then leave? I know Pesach is a Yom Tov if you're not going to put it in Masechtas Pesachim, but it's only regarding Pesach. But as we will see that regarding this argument of Sa'od and Chametz, there are different versions as to, I'm sorry, the last argument regarding shechting, there's different versions as to who said what. Not everyone agrees that Beis Shammai regarding the halacha of shchita is the one that's lenient and Beis Hillel is the one that's machmer. So therefore it's left for the last. And now the ikar of today, and as we mentioned, continuing tomorrow, will be focusing only on the first argument. If an egg was laid on Yom Tov proper, so there's a question whether that egg is lebeis Shammai, not muktzah, which means you are allowed to handle it. And not only that, you can even eat it. And Beis Hillel, who says you can't eat it, and really not only can you not eat it, you can't even handle it. And I want to make a parenthesis. This same argument is on Shabbos, right? The concept, the Shabbos, you can't cook. So there's another issue. Most people would not eat an egg anyways, because what option would you have to eat it when it's raw? Correct? So we're focusing on Yom Tov. Okay. Says the Gemara, to understand why Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel says what they say, what is the case of this egg that's laid on Yom Tov? What's the status of mama? What's the status of the hen And that will be very relevant to understanding the case. If we're speaking about the Tanach hen, ha'oimedes la'achilam, that's designated to be eaten. In other words, it came from an egg that is classified as food, a hen that prior to Yom Tov was designated, at least potentially, to be taken on Yom Tov, to be slaughtered and eaten on Yom Tov. So then, my tamayu de Beisilal, why will Beisilal prohibit eating? Why will he prohibit handling it? Why? The mother is considered designated to be food. And the egg should be viewed as, like, for example, if you have a steak, and on Yom Tov, you cut a piece of the steak off it to eat it. It's food. It's a part of what it was before. An egg is meant to be eaten. The mother was already was muchand, was prepared to be eaten. Food. It's called uchla de ifras. It's food separated from food. Food separated from food is absolutely not muktzah. You can handle it and you can eat it. There will be no reason for Beisilal to say that it's going to be a loisei yachid. Elot must be, but now the hen was designated by the owner to produce eggs. It was daf. In other words, it was that's real muktzah. The mother was set aside to be eaten. It was designated for it to be a egg producer. So the Tarnagoylis is certainly muktzah on Yom Tov. That's the definition of muktzah. It was set aside for it not to be used on Yom Tov. So if the mother is muktzah, then that which comes from the mother, that which was part of the mother, should be like the mother. Then my tamai de beishamai, this is muktzah. The egg was not designated as food before Yom Tov. And b'chlal, that's the rule of muktzah. In other words, if it was unanticipated for this to be used on Yom Tov, that should be muktzah. So that's the kasha. Now the Gemara is going to ask on itself, because we're not beginning now to discuss muktzah for the first time. There is an expectation that all of us should already have learned Masechta Shabbos, and if not, that's fine. We're going to repeat right now that not so simple. But if something was specifically designated not to be used, that's muktzah. But here, don't forget, the egg was not in the world yet. So it wasn't that it was set aside to be used. It wasn't that it was set aside not to be used. Says the Gemara, L'chayra, this is the classical argument connected to Rabbi Yehuda and Rab Shimon. Rabbi Yehuda has a much more stringent application of the rules of muktzah. According to Rabbi Yehuda, if something wasn't muchand specifically to be used, it's muktzah. Fine. But Rab Shimon doesn't hold that way. Rab Shimon doesn't say that. I'll give you one scenario of Rabbi Yehuda and Rab Shimon. What happens if when Shabbos or Yom Tov came in, there was oil in a lamp? So at that time, the oil was designated to be fuel for fire. And when the fire is lit, you can't move it even. Remember? What happens if afterwards the fire went out and now there's some leftover oil? That will be a classical example where, according to Rabbi Yehuda, it will remain muktzah for the whole Shabbos. And according to Rab Shimon, it will not. It will not. So says the Gemara, I don't understand. You're asking my tamayu de beishamai muktzah. Who says my kosher? Maybe Dilma beishamai leisle muktzah. Beishamai does not subscribe to muktzah, meaning everyone subscribes to muktzah. Maybe beishamai does not subscribe to the broader application of muktzah. Maybe beishamai does not subscribe to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Yes, like Rab Shimon, who has a much more limited application, it will not go over here. So the Gemara says, I'll tell you why I'm challenged. The challenge comes from the following presumption that even the Tana Rabbi Shimon, who has a much lighter application of muktzah, would also agree. Here, it's not like my case of the oil that was in a lamp. Here, it did not exist before Yom Tov came in. Again, Shabbos will be the same. It only came into being already during Yom Tov. And that's called noilad. It was born into the world already during Yom Tov. The noilad, the havamina, is something that's just born. Even Rab Shimon will agree, that's usher because of muktzah. So based on the presumption that even Rab Shimon, the lenient one, He limits the application of muksa. If he would agree that something that comes into being on Shabbos and or on Yom Tov is considered muksa, so now we have to understand how can Beis Shammai be that lenient and taka that lenient. Not only does he allow you to handle it, but it's so not muksa you can even eat it. So my tamayu de Beis Shammai. So we're going to go again with 4 answers. Approach number 1, Amar Rav Nachman. I agree with your premise. I agree with your premise that the Mishnah is speaking about a egg that was laid from a hen that ha'oimedis legadol beitzim. The hen was designated to be a egg producer, meaning the mother is muktzah. The mother was designated not to be eaten. However, even when it comes to this noilad, something that only came into the world now on Yom Tov, that is also subject to the argument of what we call the argument of Rabbi Yehuda and Rab Shimon, or the Islay Muksa, the Tana that ascribes to a more stringent and to a broader application of Muksa, which is the Tana Rabbi Yehuda, Islay Noilad, he will hold. And those who opine with him will all hold that that's exactly the problem of Muksa. But we're calling this Noilad, something that came into the world, was not designated to be used on Shabbos or on Yom Tov. So if it was not Mukhan, if it wasn't prepared to be used, automatically it's a Muksa. However, with the Leislei Muksa, the Tanach Rab Shimon, who doesn't apply Muksa that broadly. Likewise, Leis Nei Noilad will reject that there isn't, Noilad isn't worse. No, it wasn't in the world. But no one determined that it will not be used. It didn't exist. There was zero determination made on it. Okay? So even though it wasn't muchand, but it wasn't muksad, and it remains not muksa, at kedei kach that you can not only handle it, you can be metaltal it, you can handle it, you can even eat it. In other words, what are we saying? What is Rav Nachman saying? That Beis Shammai is paskening like the Tanach Rab Shimon, which why Beis Shammai is lenient, and Beis Hillel is part. Now, just to make it in reverse, Beis Shammai came before Rab Shimon, and Beis Hillel came before Rabbi Yehuda. But we are familiar with this argument by Muksa. We say, Rabbi Yehuda, Rab Shimon. It's this opinion that we know from Rab Shimon is actually also the opinion of Beis Shammai, or Beis Hillel, Kereb Yehuda. Now, that would be very nice. There's a big problem here. The problem is, Rav Nachman said that. We know Rav Nachman said the opposite. We know that Rav Nachman says that Beis Shammai is the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda and Beis Hillel is the sheet of Rab Shimon. Where do we find that from Rav Nachman? We're going back to Mishnah and Shabbos, Daf Kuf Mem Gimel. Beis Shammai yoimrim magbiya me'al shulchan. We are allowed to directly lift off the table bones that prior to you eating the food, they were part of food, or klippin, or different types of shells. Right? What's the issue? Bones are unfit for consumption. That's the issue here. Right? And let's go with those who understand they are unfit for human consumption, but yes, they are fit for animal consumption. However, Reb Yehuda, who has a broader application of Muksa, holds that if by the onset of Shabbos, something was designated for human consumption, and during Shabbos, it changed, and now it's only good for animal consumption. It was never muchand for animal consumption. It was never designated for animal consumption. It's muksa. That will be another area of argument. Rab Shimon holds, no, this item was designated for human consumption, so when Shabbos came in, it was not muksa. Now it could be used for animals. It's not muksa. It never became muksa. So the question whether these bones whether they are allowed to be handled or not, that will be a classical case where it's subject to this machlokes of muksa, not muksa, broader application of muksa, a more limited application of muksa. And here the machlokes is between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. So Beis Hillel holds, the Tanna Kama holds that you are directly allowed to handle it. Obviously, this Tana is following the Shita of Rab Shimon. It's not muksa. You can handle it. You can move it. Take it off the table. Beis Hillel says, no, you can't take it off the table. What do? You want to clear the table? Okay, so we have all of these ways out. Pick up the tabla. Pick up the entire table board. Table board is 100% not muksa. Umenara and shake it off. And that's the only way you can get rid of and clean your table. And on that, now, according to the way we understood, it's chapping. that Beis Hillel is following what we know to be the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Comes along Rav Nachman in Masechta Shabbos, and he had a tradition that Beis Hillel is Rab Shimon, Beis Shammai is Rabbi Yehuda, and because of that knowledge, because of that approach, v'amar Rav Nachman anu ein lanu ela Beis Shammai ke Rabbi Yehuda uBeis Hillel ke Rab Shimon, and therefore he argues that the version of the Mishnah is wrong, and it's the opposite. Wow. So clearly Rav Nachman himself said that Beis Shammai ke Rabbi Yehuda, and how did he explain right now over here? Right? Beis Hillel ke Rab Shimon. Here he said Beis Hillel is following Rabbi Yehuda. Here, that's why Beis Hillel is machmer by the egg that lo yisei. So the Gemara has a very important answer. Amalach Rav Nachman. Hold on, let me explain to you. Gabe Shabbos. Since the Sasam Lontana ke Rabbi Shimon, like we spoke out in the introduction, Rebbe, who formulated the Mishnayos, records a Mishnah, quoting a rule anonymously when it's really subject to the argument between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. But Rabbeinu HaKadosh in Masechta Shabbos paskins like Rabbi Shimon. And don't think that since Rabbeinu HaKadosh in the laws of Shabbos sides with Rab Shimon, that will mean that by Yom Tov, B'chlal Yom Tov is generally more lenient than Shabbos. For sure, he's going to be like Rab Shimon, the opposite. Rebbe paskins Shabbos like Rab Shimon. Stam Mishnah and Shabbos is like Rab Shimon. And let's not forget one thing that Rashi tells us. We always have to follow Beis Hillel. We don't paskin like Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai or Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai is not a Mishnah in the place of Beis Hillel. So since Rebbe by Shabbos paskins like Rab Shimon, for this not to contradict the issue of we paskin like Beis Hillel, in Shabbos, Beis Hillel and Rab Shimon will have the same sheet. Where do we see that Rabbeinu HaKadosh in the Masechta Shabbos is Sosam, the Mishnayos, like the sheet of Rab Shimon, the Tnan? A person can take a gourd and cut it up for an animal. And what we're going to focus on is on the next halacha, or a person can have a carcass. Now we're speaking specifically about an animal that died not before Shabbos. That's for sure not muksa. An animal that died before Shabbos, it would have been designated prior to Shabbos to be fed to the dogs. No muksa. But if you have an animal that died on Shabbos, so now there's like a new designation. Now, because it's an avela, now you want to give it to animals. When Shabbos came in, it wasn't designated to be animal food. That again is subject to the argument by Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. So the Mishnah says, the esan avela, you could cut up her carcass in front of the kelavim. So clearly we see that Rabbeinu HaKadosh holds by Shabbos, he paskins on Shabbos like Rabbi Shimon. Now, you have to paskin like Beis Hillel. So therefore, the Gemara is explaining Shitas Rav Nachman, by Shabbos, Moikim Lala Beis Hillel, ke Rab Shimon, you put those shitas together. But that's only from a Masechta Shabbos. However, Avol, Daf Beis Amid Beis, Gabe, Yom Tov, and again, just to know again, we call it Masechtas Beitzah, it's Masechtas Yom Tov. Since the source of Lontana ke Rabbi Yehuda, there is a Stam Mishnah in Masechtas Beitzah, on Daf Lamed Aleph, in where we clearly see that Rabbeinu HaKadosh writes a halacha that's really only following the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda, but he doesn't say Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. He writes it anonymously because Rabbi is writing that we paskin on Yom Tif like the more stringent opinion, which is the shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Where do we find that Stam Mishnah D'Tanan? Another one. Ein mevakin eitzim min hakoros. We may not split wood from beams. In other words, you had wood that was set aside prior to Yom Tif for construction. Since it was set aside for construction, this is what we call muksa machmas chesrenkis. A builder will not allow you to use this wood for anything else, certainly not for firewood. It was clearly not set aside for firewood prior to Yom Tov. Now the question is, if you decide on Yom Tov, since we are allowed to make fire or add to a fire, we're allowed to add to a fire, can I go ahead and take from this construction wood, can I cut a little piece of wood and burn it? No, you may not. And by the way, this is not subject to any argument. This is because all of that wood and any part of it will be muktzah machman chesra kis. However, what's the next statement? So if you have a beam that broke on Yom Tov, now the beam, when Yom Tov came in, the point is not, this is called kiven de iskatsoy lebein hashmashos. Note, when Shabbos came in, it was part of a house. Didn't exist, Keilu. And now it broke on Yom Tov. Rabbi Yehuda says, since when Yom Tov came in, it was not muchan to be used, even though right now it's a piece of wood, you would not mind using it for firewood. Even this katsoy lebein hashmashos, it remains muksa for the whole Shabbos. Rabbi Shimon doesn't subscribe to that. So this Mishnah writes that you're not allowed to take it. In other words, Rebbe is writing an anonymous Mishnah that is really only following the Shita of Rebbe Yehuda. Here again, we have to follow Beis Hillel. So therefore, by Hilchas Yom Tiv, Rav Nachman is good, stands correct by saying that Beis Hillel will follow Rebbe Yehuda. We always paskin like Beis Hillel, but there's a question as to Shabbos and Yom Tiv, and they don't go on the same track. Now, the question is, why would that be? Like, would we not be consistent? Either follow a broader application of Muktzah or follow a more lenient application of Muktzah. So, behold, okay, who was the one that formulated all of these Mishnayos? And it was Rebbe, Rabbeinu HaKadosh. So, Mishnah b'Shabbos, that the Sosam like Rab Shimon, and which is Lekula, U'Mishnah b'Yom Tiv, the Sosam like Rab Yehuda. So the Gemara explains, Amri, they said like this in the yeshiva, Shabbos is more chamur. We're not only speaking about that the punishment of Shabbos violation is more chamur, you chayv kares, chayv skila, right? Therefore, b'shoigeg you chayv chatos. On Yom Tov, you're going to be chayv malchus. We're not minimizing it. But it's more than that, like we mentioned, that for oichel nefesh, one can do that which is otherwise known to be a melacha. And not only that, but we're going to speak later a lot about this principle called sins. Mitoich shehutra, you can carry food, I can carry my siddur to shul on Yom Tov. Mitoich shehutra. So there are many things that one can do on Yom Tov. Shabbos, there are many more restrictions. So since Shabbos to begin with is something that's more chamor, says the Gemara, therefore, we are not afraid that people will take it lightly. So therefore, we can afford to have a much more liberal, lenient, lesser stringent application of muktzah. Sosam lonken abshim the meikal. And we're not afraid that if we're going to be taking the more lenient approach of muktzah, the person, the people, the oilam is going to be very mekel with Shabbos. They won't. They know Shabbos is a very chomer day. However, since Yom Tov Dikil, beginning with Oichel Nefesh, and it expands from there, and therefore it's possible v'asi lizil zulei bei, people can take it very lenient. It's only Yom Tov. To counter that, Sosam Lamke Rabbi Yehuda, who's a machmer. Atkan, explaining, substantiating, we made gerecht Rav Nachman that the machloikis is about noilad, and noilad is part of the argument between Rabbi Yehuda and Rab Shimon. And Beis Hillel over here is siding with what we know to be the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda, which is why it's muktzah, can't be eaten, it can't even be handled. And Beis Shammai, the unusual Beis Shammai, who's being the mekel, that's because Beis Shammai, even on Yom Tov, is following the shita of what we know to be the shita of Rabbi Shimon. Asks the Gemara now on Rav Nachman. And because of this question, we'll have other Amoraim that have a very different approach. But Mayokimta, all of this was predicated, the opening Gemara was the mother hen, was it designated to be eaten? Was it designated to be an egg producer? But Mayokimta, okay, you're saying that the mother was definitely set aside to produce eggs. The mother is muktzah. And the question is regarding the egg, whether the egg is muktzah noilad or not. So says the Gemara, why did they argue regarding the egg when the truth is that this same argument will be regarding the mother itself? Just to know that even though when Bein Hashmashos came in, when the Shabbos came in, like we mentioned, the oil and the lamb, right? That the mother, the hen, was designated to be megadol beitzim, but if the owner changes his or her mind over Yom Tov, now you want to use it to eat. According to Rab Shimon, the hen will be permitted, just to make that clear. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, not. So their argument is just like it is by the egg, the same thing it is by the mother. So why are they arguing only regarding the egg? So the Gemara answers, I'll tell you why. But what the chiddush is like we mentioned, there was a havamina. What was the havamina? That even Rab Shimon would say, noilad is muksa. And that's the reason we want to emphasize the power of the lenient one, that even noilad, Beishamai, over here, Rab Shimon will hold that it is permitted to be handled and even eaten. Now, normally, that will be enough of an answer, because whenever you have to pick and choose whether to emphasize the chiddush of the machmer or the chiddush of the mekel, we always say, wow, he's that lenient. However, over here, why don't they argue on the hen, right? That even though it's only, so to say, muktzah, but still it's going to be aser. And if you're going to answer me what you always do, koyach the hetera adif, over here I have a unique question, and that is, why didn't Rebbe write about both the hen, both the mother, and the egg? And like Tosfos here points out, normally the Gemara will not ask that question, because if you're going to make the argument about both, you're going to have to add many, many words in the Mishnah. And Rabbeinu HaKadosh kept everything very brief, lashon kitzara. But over here, all you need to do is to add very few words. And if you would add very few words, you would be able to clearly articulate this argument, both by the tarnagoylis, by the hen, by the mother, and by the egg. And we should have done so over here. And we would have the best of both worlds. We would be underlying the koichan of Beishamai, that even noilad is mutter, and we would be emphasizing the koichan of Beis Hillel, that even the mother that was already in the world is going to be aser. Why didn't the Mishnah say Tav negoilis hoy medes legadol beitzim? He ubeitzasa Beishami oimim teyachel ubeis Hillel oimim loy seyachel. Now you can already understand this doesn't refute Rav Nachman, because the rule is koichan de hetera adife, but that was question enough for Rabbah to reject the approach of Rav Nachman, and now comes approach number 2 in the understanding of the first argument in the Mishnah. Elo Amar Rabbah. Lo oilam, I'm going back, that the Mishnah is speaking about the tarnagoyles that was actually designated prior to Yom Tov to be eaten. The problem is that the mother is food. The egg is a part of the food. What's the problem with eating the egg? Here we go. This is the famous hachana de Rabba sugya. The word hachana means preparation. Now, what we are learning now, according to most, is a biblical problem, according to Rabba. But let's begin that the problem arises when Yom Tov falls out on Sunday, and that is essential. Then we expand it from there. What's Yom Tov falling out on Sunday? Now, Umishum, these are the words of Rabbah. The problem is, the reason why the problem of Beis Hillel, why does Beis Hillel prohibit? Because of the principle of hachana, because of the principle of preparation. And this is known as hachana de Rabbah. What's Rabbah's preparation issue? Ukasava Rabbah. First, there is going to be a biological fact that kol Beitzah the misyaldo ha'idna, whenever an egg is laid on any given day, that means that's an indication that may esmoil gomirila, that it became fully formed inside the mother yesterday. So if it's born Yom Tov Sunday, when was it fully formed? On Shabbos. The Rabbah l'taimei, Rabbah will disqualify even something that's naturally prepared for Yom Tov. On Shabbos, Shabbos can never prepare for Yom Tov. Once the egg was naturally formed, fully formed the day prior to it coming into the world. So when was it prepared? On Shabbos, but it was prepared in nature. On Shabbos for Yom Tov. Let's read it inside. Amar Rabba, Rabba said like this. When it says in the portion of Bishalach, this is regarding the manna, that it comes on a Friday. vehechinu eis asher yuviu. We needed to prepare that which we will bring to eat the next day. Now, the preparation that we did on Friday for the manna or on the manna to consume it on Shabbos cannot mean that they were told that you have to bake it on Friday for Shabbos or you have to cook it on Friday for Shabbos. That the Torah writes explicitly. Eis asher toifu is efu, and that which you pre-cooked, then you can eat it on Shabbos. We already know that if any type of malacha will have to be done to the food, it will have to be done on Friday for Shabbos. This verse where the Torah says, according to Rashi, means that a person has to make a verbal declaration, this food I am designating for tomorrow. It has to be humanly designated on Friday for Shabbos, or Erev Yom Tov for Yom Tov. What may not happen, something may not be designated on Shabbos for Yom Tov, or on Yom Tov for Shabbos. Choil is Meichen l'Shabbos. Choil Meichen l'Yom Tov. Ve'ein Yom Tov Meichen l'Shabbos, ve'ein Shabbos Meichen l'Yom Tov. In other words, according to Rabbah, let's go with the Rashi's approach, Midah Oiraisa, food for any holy day, for Shabbos or for Yom Tov, needs to be prepared beforehand, and the beforehand has to be on an ordinary day. So since it was now prepared on Shabbos, it was born on Sunday, you're not allowed to have something on Yom Tov if it was prepared on a holy day prior. Again, even though it was naturally prepared. The only problem is that if there is such an issue that you can't have something prepared for Yom Tov on Shabbos, then the prohibition should only be when Yom Tov falls out on Sunday. We never had that in the Mishnah. Right, to his teacher, Terabah, Elama'ata, Yom Tov Ba'alma Tishri. No, the Mishnah should have clarified that the only prohibition, according to Beis Hillel, is when it's on Sunday. So here we said, no, clarifies the Gemara. The problem is called Hachana. The problem is really only when Yom Tov is on Sunday, and that's an Isur Doiraisa, according to the way we're learning. However, the Chachamim made a Gzeira. If we'll be allowed to eat eggs that were laid on Yom Tov, eggs from mothers that were designated to lay eggs, or designated to be eaten. No muktzah issue. The mother was food, so therefore what comes from the mother is called a part of the food. The problem is, Hachana, if the Chachamim would say, guys, there's a din Torah, don't have the eggs that are laid on Sunday. If Yom Tov is going to be on Monday and you'll eat it, and on Tuesday you'll eat it, and on Wednesday you'll eat it, then you'll forget and you'll eat it even though it was laid on Sunday. So they made a halacha across the board. Loi plug, an egg that's laid on Yom Tov may never be eaten. So now, frag the Gemara, Shabbos the Alma Tishtri. Same question. What about if an egg is laid on Shabbos? Now, like I mentioned, really the argument in the Mishnah is also concerning Shabbos. It's just that most people don't have a raw egg. You can't cook it on Shabbos. But if you're having, the Russians had the guggle muggle, or something like I get from my mom. They used to have these eggs that the chazana would think that if you have a raw egg, then you'll be a big chazan. So what about if an egg comes out on Shabbos? And again, theoretically, if it's not Shabbos after Yom Tov, it should be allowed. Shabbos the Alma Tishtiri. Yes.
Is this not called a Gzeira the Gzeira?
No, because we're learning that Hachana the Rabbah is a din Torah, Danny. Din Torah. If an egg is born on Sunday Yom Tov, Midoi Raisa, since it was prepared on Shabbos for Sunday, it may not be eaten. Doi Raisa. So now we're making one Gezeira. Same thing would be Shabbos the Alma Tishtri. Zelbazach, Gezeira Mishum Shabbos, Achar Yom Tov. Right? Ein Yom Tov Meichen l'Shabbos. So now the Gemara says, are you telling me, right? Umi Gosrinon, are we extending it? No, the across the board, an egg may never be consumed if it's laid on Yom Tov is because we extend, right? We extend this type of Gezeira. The Isur of Hachana the Rabbah, we make Gezeiras on it. No. It can be for Hatanya. If a person slaughters a hen, and in it you find completely fully formed eggs, they are allowed to be eaten on Yom Tov. Now I want to say the following. This is independent whether these eggs were fully matured today, or even if these eggs were fully matured yesterday. Doesn't matter what day of the week was yesterday. When something is inside or taken from inside the mother, it's considered as a limb of, a part of the mother. This is b'chlal not included in Achana Darab. So if you shecht an egg, if the hen was designated to be slaughtered, which is the case of the Beitzah, and you slaughter it on Yom Tov, it's not shaykh if you're taking it out of, since the mother is, food, we viewed the egg as an extension of the mother. The problem is, let's make exeda. The im isa that we have this din of hachana, and it's such a powerful din that we have to build fences around it. Why don't we say that if we are going to be allowed to take an egg outside, to take the egg from the mother, then a person will erroneously allow for an egg to be eaten even if it was born. And then we got a problem. And if it's born on Yom Tov, we learned in our Mishnah, it's going to be usher. So Amalei, the Gemara responds, that Beitzah, Gemurais, B'me'ei iman, that slaughtering a hen and finding in it a fully formed egg is something, it's called something that's of a rare occurrence, and we have this rule, okay. But otherwise, Hachana Darabba is such an important din that we make gezedas to protect it. So because of Yom Tov after Shabbos, Hachana Darabba, the egg is going to be asr. They said on every Yom Tov, the egg is going to be asr. Let's have time. Let's learn the third approach of the Mishnah. Rav Yosef Amar. And Rav Yosef, like Rashi makes clear, is holding that the hen, right, is designated for consumption. It's Rav Yosef is opining with Rabbah. And if the problem is that if the hen was designated for consumption prior to Yom Tov, so then why don't we view the egg as a piece of food that came from food? Rav Yosef did not subscribe to this Hachana Darabba. Elama, he says that it's even on a Sunday, it's always only a rabbinic prohibition, according to Beis Hillel. What's the prohibition? Mishum peiros hanoishnen. If fruit falls off the tree on Shabbos, midoiraisa, you would be allowed to eat it. Midrabanan, you may not eat it. Why may you not eat it? Because they were afraid that if a person is going to take a fruit that fell off the ground on Shabbos or on Yom Tov, you might actually take it off the tree. Taking a fruit off the tree, that's an Isur Dairais. So here comes like this. If they would allow us to have an egg that was laid on Yom Tov, that resembles, makes sense. The hen lays eggs, and the tree, so to say, lays fruits, produces fruits. So if we would be allowed to have the egg, erroneously we would go ahead and we would take the fruit, and taking the fruit is asr midrabanan. Now, Danny, this is exeda. It's called exeda. It's mishum peiros hanoishnen. So Amalei Abaye to Rav Yosef, hold on. Even fruits that fell off the tree on their own, tamamai. It's not that it's asr midoiraisa on top of Dav Gimel. That is only exeda. And what was the exeda? If they would allow us to take a fruit that naturally fell off the tree, then maybe Yalav Yitli, someone will ascend the tree and pick off or pluck, harvest the fruits. So that's exeda. So he goof exeda, va'anan neika minix exeda. The egg resembles this, which that's only midrabanan. So here comes the classical answer. Kula chada exeda he. Look inside Rashi's second line from the top. That it was when the Chachamim made the one gezeda, you may not have fruit that fell off the tree by itself. Included in that, according to Beis Hillel, was you can't have an egg that was laid on Yom Tov. Loy shetehezu Rashi gezeda the loy leiseli they paid us hanisharim. Ella, the third line in Rashi from the top, that keshenimnu begazru, when the Sanhedrin convened and they took a vote and they made gezeda al peiros hanisharim, that you can't have fruit that fell off a tree. right at the same time, af Beitzah hoisa b'mashma, af al gav, that over there, leis le mishum talisha, there you can't pluck it out of the tree. You can't even in potential violate an Isser Dairaisa. Miu mechlal gezedas chachamim hoisa, sha'af hi pri hanoy. That's exactly what an egg is. An egg is a fruit, is a product that's coming from the mother, that's coming from the source. So it was one gezeda. So what did Bekitzer, and recap, one way of understanding the Mishnah is that we're speaking dafke about the egg that was ha'imedes l'kadol beitzim, and take, the question is even regarding the mother, both regarding the mother and regarding the egg. This is subject to the machlokes of Rabbi Yehuda and Rab Shimon. Or approach number 2 and number 3 is that we're speaking not about an egg that was designated to lay eggs, but we're speaking about a hen that was designated to be eaten. Either we have the issue of hachana derabba or gzeira midrabanan mishum peiros hanisharim, and God willing, tomorrow we will start with the 4th and final approach in understanding this machlokes. To be continued.
Rabbi, can you explain by the gzeira of the Paris? It's because he's gonna go on the tree and pick it. But by the Beitzah, even though we included in that, what is the gzeira on Beitzah? What is he gonna do if he eats the Beitzah? You can't,
Zvika. You can't. What the Sanhedrin said, you can't have a fruit that naturally came into the world from its source. You can't have that on Shabbos and on Yom.
But what's the gzeira that you're gonna do with this egg? What's the gzeira? By Paris, I get it, but what's the gzeira with the egg?
You can't do anything wrong with an egg. But when they said you can't have an apple, they said you can't have an apple, you can't have an egg, you can't have they included it together. They included it all together.
What does gezerah mean?
Gezerah means a rabbinic enactment, which is which is a prohibitive nature. Don't do one thing because you might end up breaking a Torah law. Any fence around the Torah is called a gezerah, a decree.
Rabbi, I don't understand that last answer of Rabbi. It asks, why don't you geyser on the egg, on the chicken, right? That's shechted and you have the egg inside it. So it answered, oh, it's not common. So therefore they didn't make that takana. But you said earlier that the whole concept of it being prepared beforehand on Shabbos, you said that's not a gzeira. That's actually
Danny, I'll repeat it. So we said like this, that an egg that comes into the world is like its own mitzias, and since it was prepared the day prior, that's a chana derabba doiraisa. When you shecht a hen and in it is an egg, since when you shechted the mother, the egg was not in the world, we never viewed the egg as an independent existence. It's part of the mother.
But it was prepared on
the mother was not prepared. We don't view the mother that way. We don't view an animal that you slaughtered today that it was prepared yesterday. We don't view it that way. It was prepared way before. An egg that comes into the world, it's developing, even though the animal grows. We don't view an animal that way. An egg we view that way.